Good morning, hello, and welcome to the webinar, What Does Open Science Really Mean? I'm Michele Catanzaro, I have a PhD in physics, I'm a freelance journalist and the moderator of this session. The event is organized by the Marie Curie Alumni Association and EuroScientist, and it's part of a series of webinars that we started last year. We have dealt with subjects as different as science and the refugee crisis, and to the European convergence in science and others. If you are happy at the end of the seminar, you can follow the social networks of the Marie Curie Alumni Association and EuroScientist to stay tuned on the next webinars. The term open science is something that is somehow fuzzy at the moment. It is used to refer to open access to journals, sharing of scientific data, easy reproducibility of research, transparency in research evaluation, also citizen science, and many other things. Maybe the fact that it's so broad, it's a signal that we are really living a sort of paradigm shift in which things are not so clear at the moment. Also, the big answer that we received in the subscription to this webinar, 400 people subscribed to it. It's a kind of another signal that it's something that is really hot at the moment. In a certain sense, we could even think that open science is kind of the application to science of changes that are happening throughout society and business and industry, like, you know, Industry 4.0, the disappearance of intermediation, and many other phenomena. However, in this webinar, we will try to, from abstract conception, and try to ground down the thing in a way in which scholars and the people that are participating in the webinar can really learn and understand how they can engage into open science. We have gathered a wonderful group of people with many different backgrounds and perspectives and personal implication into open science. So I think it will be really productive. The whole webinar lasts 1 hour. There will be a first round of interventions by the 4 speakers, 5 minutes each. And then the largest part of the webinar will be question and answers moderated by me, which means I can pose questions, but you, now I'm referring to the public, you have the possibility to post questions on the box, through the box on the right of your videos. This is the place where you can post questions. We also have an hashtag, which is Open Science Webinar, one word, Open Science Webinar, but this is just for comment and for Twitter. If you want to post questions, please use the box on the right of the screen. So let's start with the first speaker. I will just introduce them, not all together, but before they talk. So the first speaker is Ivo Grigorov. He's a marine science researcher at the Technical University of Denmark and member of the FOSTER project, a project that is aimed at promoting open science education among researchers. So Ivo, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me in this webinar and panel. So I guess to answer the question directly and briefly, what does open science really mean to me? For me, it's just the way science should have been done, I guess, and it is really a collection of best practices that ensures reproducible research that anyone at any stage can come and validate the question. And I think that's a central pillar to excellent research. So it's sometimes difficult to understand why people treat open science differently to just the right way of doing research. So my personal background, I'm a marine researcher by training. At the moment, the day job entails supporting other researchers and colleagues in the process of funding their great ideas, generating great ideas, and formulating them in a way that ensures that they lead to projects and can be implemented. And my personal really first touch with open science was serendipitous, and it wasn't that long ago if you consider the bigger picture. around 10 years ago, in a very much into the internet age and into a big research project, we came up against the task of rescuing some data out of research publications. And what that entailed is using a software that some of you may know, the data thief software. And it wasn't so elegant. It basically required scanning PDFs of papers that were once in electronic and machine readable version. And you can imagine what the quality deterioration around that is. And converting that into data so that the data can be digitally used. If you think that is funny now, it was really funny back then. And unfortunately, still happening. Unfortunately, we still hear echoes that that is still a necessity. So the question is why? Why in the internet age, when everything should be machine readable and electronic formats, are we creating ourselves these unnecessary loopholes and deteriorating quality and creating extra work? And what does that mean for really advancing ideas and research? So that was my really first step into open science. Currently, I am one of many great partners in the Foster and Foster Plus initiatives, which is a coordination and support action to support both the EC and the academic ecosystem, if you like, of various partners, open science and making it part of the research process. So what we do is we do that mainly through training, but we do train the strategy of the academic ecosystem, if you like. If you consider from the bottom, from the students, from the graduate schools, all the way to the senior researchers that supervise them and the project managers that sometimes employ these students later on in their career. But also all the way up to the top, we also assist training national contact points, which are frequently embedded in funding organizations, and we'll also assist the European Commission and also alumni associations and webinars like this in order to get the broader outreach.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Ivo. I think a fascinating aspect of your story is that you kind of bumped into open science through a real first-person necessity as a researcher. I think it's nice because sometimes open science looks like a buzzword, but in fact, it's something that can really have a real impact in life of researchers. So let's move to the following speaker. But before that, let me tell you that we are 150 now following the webinar. So it's really a lot of people, and I hope it stays interesting for everybody. So next speaker is Eva Mendez, Professor of Information Science at Carlos III University in Spain. Her expertise is on metadata, and she's also a member of the European Commission Open Science Policy Platform. Eva, the stage is yours.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. It is fantastic to share the panel with you and have these, different approaches to open science. Probably we will agree upon many of them. But for me, the main issue about open science is that open science is an attitude. It's an attitude of the researchers to make science transparent and reproducible. There are many approaches of meaning of the open science, but also many metaphors. One of the most common ones is that it's an umbrella term that gathers a lot of things. Some of them you have mentioned them in the introduction. You mentioned the open access to publications, open data. Particularly, I will just underline open research data, which is the key issue that open science tries to take over in a data-driven research, and is the most difficult thing due to the data protections, due to data behaviors, due to the researchers. They don't care about sharing data. They take the data for themselves, and the science has been too focused on the publications, not in the data. But also open science in this umbrella term, and I mentioned in Twitter too that it for me is a mushroom because it's something like life and grows. So and also it includes an attitude of collaborative research, and also open education, citizen science, open methodologies. Something that is very important in the methodologies for me, and now is just in the debate of the parliament, is the text and data mining. How to do text and data mining to make the research better. And also, for me, another key issue is the open peer review. Just not open the results, but open the process. Open the results, data and publications, open the process, methodologies, and peer review, and also open minds and open attitude to the public at large. So that's open education and citizen science. But also for me, open science has to be grounded in three main pillars. One is the research integrity, the new research behavior based on a great integrity to make this happen. Another one is the research infrastructures, like the European Open Science Cloud, which is the big thing now, and probably we will debate afterwards. And also the rewarding system. That is the key issue to make this change the whole thing. Well, that's more or less my approach. Is you bump into me in the street and you say, what is open science? But let me go through, like Ivo said before, I'm myself a researcher. I'm a researcher in library science, and my research focuses on digital infrastructures to organize data and organize information. So I'm an expert on metadata, and I do my research how to improve metadata to make open science happen from a technical and infrastructure point of view. But also in a political layer, I'm a member of the European Open Science Policy Platform, which is a group of people that we try to represent different constituencies and different statements of the research. So I'm representing the JERUN, the Young European Research Universities Network, because we are young universities. We are younger than 50 years old. And I think that the universities that we are young, we have to move forward the wall, and we are probably, it's easier for us to move to an open science movement. So this is more or less my approach, and I'm also belonging to the Research Data Alliance. I'm creating Research Data Alliance Iberia. In a national level in Spain, I belong to the Metadata Working Group. I'm very much involved in different things. So perhaps we can go deeper afterwards.
Yes, I hope so. Great, thanks a lot, Eva. I think you have pointed to a key issue. I mean, the cultural idea that is widespread within science, that basically making science is making publications. And also thanks a lot for mentioning this very specific project, like the projects on text mining or open peer review, which really point to the fact that things are really happening. It's not just some abstract thing being discussed. Okay, so next speaker, Sascha Friesike, researcher at the Free University of Amsterdam and an associated researcher at the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society in Berlin. His research focuses on how technology can help in opening science and the role it can play in creative processes, and his education is in industrial engineering. So, Sascha, the stage is yours.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. So personally, I came to this entire topic because I wrote a PhD on innovation management. And in innovation management, there's a thing called open innovation. And open innovation is the idea that you bring external actors into the R&D process and then speed up the process, get more efficient. And we thought to ourselves, well, maybe we could also do something like that in science. And then we termed the word open science and Googled it and found out that hundreds of others already used the word to describe all kinds of things. And so basically my background comes more from the idea that the organization of science might not be as pragmatic as it could be, and we could be more efficient by bringing external partners into the mix. And I think what we just discussed, what we just heard, the idea that this is a fuzzy term and nobody really knows what it actually means, comes from the fact that science, the way that the scientific system, the way that we have it today, grew over centuries. And basically, we have a very strong past dependence on things we came up earlier. In the very early days, scientists would write another letters, and then these letters would be bound into collections. That's why many journals still have the name letters in them. And so basically everything that came afterwards, the peer review and so on, is kind of attached to the idea that we produce paper-based articles. And now we are in 2017, and more people see that there's a certain disarray between how science is carried out and how we would design it if we could redesign it from scratch. And then we would say, well, there's other things we could also do. We don't necessarily have to write a single article. Why can't we do a webinar? And then people would say, well, that's not what we used to do. We don't have any form of measurements of impact on webinars, so we don't really know how to deal with them. I think that is a key disarray that we have currently. And so I came from this more pragmatic point of view, but over time, I think I shifted in the things I look at. And I'm now more concerned with basically the changing nature of science itself. So how is the idea of scientific impact changing due to digital tools? And I think this is a very important and profound question, because we currently have a situation where we have become so complex in science in the way we communicate with one another that it's very hard for outside people to follow up what we're actually doing. And we're basically losing our voice of reason, voice of science, because we're too involved in inside baseball. So my idea currently is that, or what I look at currently is the changing nature of impacts. I'll give you a couple examples. In scientific system, we think that the impact of a scientific work originates from an individual scientist. So we have those famous scientists. We give out Nobel Prizes to individual scientists. And more we see how science becomes a massively collaborative effort. We have scientific questions that are so complicated that hundreds, in some cases thousands of people need to come together to solve them. So here impact changes in a way. Then I addressed this a little bit. We always have the idea that impact in science comes from a paper-based output. This is either an article or a book. But we currently do a webinar. We could also do a YouTube video. We could put slides online. There's many other ways nowadays we can have impact in a digital realm, but we don't really understand that in the trajectory or in the history, in the past dependence of science. Next thing is that science itself always thinks that impact comes from a static product. So you write an article, then you publish it, and then you're done with it, and you go on to the next project. And this is not really how the internet works. If you find something new, you update it. So we see more and more impact actually coming from dynamic projects. If someone wants to know something, they go to Wikipedia, not necessarily to a scientific source. So here seems to be a shift. And then the last thing is that we always think that scientific impact happens within academia. And I see in the open science movement a lot of discussion about that science needs to shift that position to have more impact outside of academia. But all the ways we measure the scientific impact has always been inside academia. So how many other academics cite you, how many other academics think that the stuff you work on is relevant? And now we see a certain disconnect to the rest of society, and then we have all these debates we currently have. And I think in open science also means that we have a changing idea of how scientists communicate what they actually do and the results that they have to those stakeholder groups that are interested in it. So that's my take.
Thanks a lot, Sasha. I think a very important aspect to highlight is that you have shown that this is not just, that business as usual will not work somehow, that it's really, this open science transition is really deeply, let's say, written in the evolution that science and society in general is taking. I think this is an important point because somehow it seems to be that there's a kind of inertia in the scientific community that, scientists are busy, why should they care somehow? And I think you have made a very strong point on why they should care indeed. Okay, fine. So our last speakers before the question and answer session, it's Julie Sainz, policy officer at the European Commission. She works in a unit called C, which beyond this technical name is in fact the unit that developed the policies underlying the Marie Curie action, which I'm sure many of you know very well. She's responsible in particular for promoting open science through the Marie Curie actions. And in, let's say, her previous life as a researcher, she worked in stem cells and cell therapy in Belgium and in France. So, Julie, the stage is yours.
Yes, hello everybody. First of all, thanks a lot to the Marie Curie Alumni Association, to the EuroScientist for organizing this webinar. I think this is a fantastic opportunity. So I'm very happy to be here today. A lot has been said already as to what open science may mean. I think for me, it sort of encompasses open access to publication, open research data, fair data management, but also, open peer reviewing, as Eva mentioned, citizen science, public engagement, and of course, all these practices have to be reflected also in a new approach of research ethics and integrity, because with all of these opening data, which data should we open, how do we make them open, etc., comes also some new behaviors that we have to be aware of and that we have to take care of. So for us, because since I'm representing somehow the funders' perspective here, I think for the Marie Curie actions, as you know, we're always trying to promote researchers' careers development, and for us, of course, the way basically science is being done is clearly changing. The modus operandi of science is really changing. So we have to take that into account in what we fund. That means for us, when we evaluate proposals, we want to find ways of basically rewarding open science practices. Open science practices themselves, but also basically people that are promoting training in open science. So for us, it's really, so we're trying to reflect the importance of open science in various of our formal documents, our work program, for example, our guide for applicants when you draft proposals for the Marie Curie actions. Hopefully we will be in the next coming years also, we're going to try to implement some online training modules, which should include some training modules on open science in practice. How can I basically, as a scientist, implement and make open science a reality in my daily work? So all this is trying to fall into place little by little. So we're really trying to advertise the open science and trying to support how can you actually make this a reality in your daily work. Beyond that, so there's our support towards researchers, research networks, etc., or organizations at the funding level, but we're also trying to participate in the overall, I would say, policy debate on open science, because we, of course, if we're always saying to researchers, yes, go for it, open science is great, you will get, better data, more data, you will get it faster for cheaper, etc., it's great. But if there isn't, because implementing open science also takes, some time and some effort. You get some return on investment, but you still have to put some time and effort into that. And so we're trying now to find ways of rewarding that. So actually the fact that researchers are picking up on open science and making it a reality forces us also to reflect on how we are evaluating now researchers, more generally speaking, when we recruit researchers and for the promotion. So for the development of their careers, because if we say to our young researchers, fine, do open science, etc., but then their bosses go as supervisors or PIs tell them, well, I think you should better focus on your hardcore research. What are you wasting time going to this science festival or or opening up your data or whatever? This is a waste of time. So my message is basically open science has to be a reality, but not only for the youngest generations, meaning, for example, there's a lot of focus on the PhD candidates, but also all across the whole scale of researchers. So more experienced researchers should also be involved in the open science development and take a very active part into that if we want it all to work. So I think open science is not only a reality for youngsters with the social media, etc. It's for everybody to take part in. I think so. It has to be something quite inclusive, and it forces us to think that researchers should not only be evaluated on their publications, as it has been long done, but also, you know, on all these other activities that researchers do that are sort of put on the side, but that actually takes a lot of time. You know, if you're participating in open days in your institution, or if you're promoting your research, I don't know, on whatever media, your blog, if you're making your data open in a proper manner, you know, filing your data, accompanying the raw data with the right metadata, filing it where it should be, all this takes time. So all of these things should be rewarded by the funders, so the research funding organizations, and also the research performing organizations. And so at policy level, this is what we're trying to work on. Eva mentioned the Open Science Policy Platform, and I'll just finish with that. The Commission has also set different working groups that feed into the reflection of this Open Science Policy Platform, basically how to translate this in a reality. And I was lucky to be part of a working group on skills and open science and on rewards. So exactly, we were trying to reflect on some kind of open science open science career assessment matrix, which basically was saying, okay, this is how now we could evaluate researchers and reward them for all these activities, not only with their publications, but on how they participate to our society and to making science more collaborative, more open overall. And so this is a big revolution also for research performing organizations and funders on the way they perceive and assess researchers, but I think it's something important to incentivize the movement.
Sorry, thanks a lot, Julie. Thanks a lot. One practical thing, I think we lost your camera while you were speaking. Could you just check that? I mean, we heard perfectly your intervention, so it was fine. This is why I didn't interrupt you. But I think we lost your camera. So if you could just check whether it's turned on or off on the
Okay, I'll replug it in.
Oh, okay, great, fine. Anyway, the audio was perfect, so the message got through. Okay, I think also there was I mean, something I would like to highlight, that in a couple of talks, at least, it has come out that the rewarding system is really a key component of the story. That is, I mean, changing, let's say, the incentives that research have in a way that they can make space and time for open science is a kind of a key aspect. Okay, so let us start the debate. We already have questions flowing in, but let me ask you a first simple question, which is basically, what advice? I mean, most of our public are probably young researchers, PhDs, postdoc students. What would you advise to them? I mean, if they wanted to start, let's say, themselves into this field, is there any recommendation, either in their broader attitude or in practical things they could do starting from now? Anybody is welcome to comment.
So who wants to go? So it's me going first. I think there's a lot of debate about that. Basically, you have a lot of systemic disadvantages if you do not only focus on research output. But from my personal experience, I would argue that this is a little bit too oversimplified. And I think that especially young researchers can benefit a lot from opening their research process up. And one thing that I find is simply the attention that you receive. If your publications are openly available, I get so much more people that contact me because they find something that I worked on that's online, that's freely available. And in the end of the day, that's why you do research. You do research so somebody uses your results. You don't do it to publish it and then go on to the next thing. So I think in general, if a researcher is honest and says, do I publish to get read or do I publish to get published? I hope that most young researchers will say, I would like to publish to be read. And if that's the thing why you're in that, then I think opening it up allows so many opportunities to get in contact with other people that a closed system simply doesn't allow you. So I think there are actually many advantages for people simply starting by attention by taking the time, understanding what all of this means and how to proceed and opening up your own research process. Of course, it kind of depends on what your research is, and it might not start with the preprint, might start with a preprint, might not be that open access the first thing you do, might be that it is, might not be that you would like to share your data, might be a great thing for the stuff you do that you share your data. So I think it depends very much on the individual case, but just thinking about how can I open up my research process to have a bigger impact with the stuff I already do anyways, I think is in general a thing that young researchers will have an advantage out of.
Okay. Any other remarks from the panel?
I do absolutely agree with Sasha. I think he just pointed out perfectly. It's one kind of impact is the impact factor, that is a construction done by 19th century research, and the other thing is the real impact of your research. And if you want to have a real impact in your research to change the world, you need to have an open science attitude. So people will just examine your research outcomes and improve them. And I have a theory in my personal point of view that sometimes it's hard as a researcher to open your results. The later you open your results, the later you discover the mistakes. If you really want good research, you have to do open science.
Yeah, I think this connects with one of the questions, a question from Marta. She says, does open science offer a solution for publishing negative results and make them available to the community?
I think there are more infrastructure and platforms available than there is willingness to do it. There is definitely at least one journal we know or publisher that encourages that. The problem is going back to...
You mean the Journal of Negative Results, right?
Right, right. The problem is that all of the other panelists mentioned that there is no incentive to do so. And when we look at the private sector, for example, this negative results is one area where pharmaceutical industry actually collaborates rather than competes, right? And that is a surprise. Why is a competitive sector like this beating academia at attitude? It's because we don't have the incentive. They see it as an incentive of lost time and money and dead-end streets that they don't want to repeat, right? So why are we any different? And in any case, if we go back to the pillars of good research, our mission should be to push the boundaries of knowledge, whether we like the results or not. So somehow we just need to formalize an incentive to allow people to do that without being told by their supervisor that it's a waste of time.
Okay.
And I would even argue that there is already an incentive. I don't think any project needs necessarily to go into an article publication. If you have negative results, simply write up a preprint, put it on a preprint server, and maybe someone finds it someday and says, well, that's actually interesting, I'll get in contact with you. Reuses your data, finds something else in there, and you have a future collaborator simply by putting something out that otherwise would have been in a drawer, and it probably wasn't too much work to put that together and put it online.
I think Eva said a sentence that was really impactful somehow, which is that impact is much more than impact factor. So we have a question here from Michaela, precisely on this point, on whether alternative metrics could help. For example, she mentions altmetrics as an alternative metric to assess the impact of research. What is how do you rate these alternative metrics and specifically altmetrics? And do you think they are relevant for open science?
Absolutely. Actually, in the context of these working groups that Julie was mentioning before, there was an expert group on focusing on metrics, and we are now in the European Open Science Policy Platform working on this rewarding system and all metrics, and we prefer to call them next generation metrics, because it's not only about alternative metrics. It's like that we really need a new generation of metrics to be available to measure this, you know. because somebody mentioned before, I think it was Shasha, on internet things happen differently. So you cannot apply 19th century metrics to evaluate digital scholarly communication.
Okay,
yeah, and
I think we have a question.
Maybe just
okay,
very, very quickly, Altmetrics still only look at article publication. So they basically look at how much attention do articles get outside of simply citations. But that doesn't solve the problem of putting online a webinar that helps many people, and you can't cite that. You can't. It's not, and we don't have an Altmetrics score for this webinar. So I think it's a good thing that something happened, but we aren't there yet.
Okay, okay. Okay, there's a question that I think is especially for Julie, but everybody could answer, by Asuncion, and she says, are there any conversations or policies in motion with European Union accreditation agencies so that open access is rewarded for academic promotion?
Okay, so I think I see what the question is about. It's about basically including this somehow in the training as this ECTS, I think, the credits. So while you do your training for PhD candidates, I suppose this is what she's alluding to. This is a topic that is on the table. It has been mentioned in the context of, I know the working group we had here with the external experts, etc., on the skills that are necessary to implement basically open science. I don't think there has been a consensus decision reached about this yet, but it is clearly something that is on the table. And as I was saying earlier, we are clearly increasingly, at least through our MSCA funding scheme, trying to encourage projects that basically are including open science dimensions in their training components, and I think this is already a good starting point. Of course, we need to take a step further. It also means for us, when we are evaluating proposals, this is on the other side of the coin, we also have to now, I think, in the future, train our evaluators to also, when they are evaluating research projects or researchers, on how should they assess these researchers, not only maybe on the of course we already are looking at other aspects in publications, etc. But for example, I think we should start considering including preprints, that people could actually put that also in their proposals to show a bit what they've been working on, and all these different activities that they're involved in. I think the Marie Curie program is already quite a step ahead in that sense, because we are so much focused on the development of researchers along with their research projects. But of course, there's still quite some work ahead of us, but we're really trying to get things moving forward. So I'm very happy that actually to see that there is support for this and that researchers have some appetite to embrace open science in such a way, especially young researchers. But again, I think it's very important that we go through all, that open science really takes a grasp across all the different career stages. Otherwise, it will go things will go slower. So if you want this to really take off, we also need to inform people that are involved in recruitment processes in research performing organizations, and people that are evaluating proposals in funding organizations, to take this into account when they're actually looking at proposals drafted by researchers or consortia.
Okay. Indeed, there seems to be a lot of appetite. In fact, we have more than 160 people, 160 following us. So it seems that, and a lot of questions coming in. So there is a very fascinating question by Hassad. He asks, do you see the application of blockchain, the blockchain algorithm, in any form to answer the issue of open science and also as an alternative impact metric tool? Any comment on blockchain and open science, or blockchain and science, maybe we could say?
I do love that question, because I think there is a lot of interest put now in blockchain technologies. And I think a lot of misunderstanding about that. But I do really believe, even if I'm not an expert in blockchain, I would love to know more technically to be more conscious about this. But I think the way of make atomic contribution in the blockchain technology will help something that is crucial for me in the open science world, which is that the responsibility of being open is from the researcher, not for the performing organization, not for the funder. The point is what I call the motivators of will. The motivator of will to do your research open, it will be your own behavior. I mean, and I think in the blockchain technologies, you have this way of make autonomous contributions, and also the rewarding system based on the evaluation one by one. So you can gather a lot of reward on a personal basis.
Any other comment on blockchain and open science?
Yeah, maybe just very briefly. So as we learn, open science is a lot of things at the same time. So it's very hard to say, well, one technology solve all these things. And also in open science, much of what we discuss is not necessarily a technological issue, but more of a cultural issue. So yes, there is many ideas in blockchain that could be used in science. Just think about the pre-registration of a clinical trial and then the direct writing of data into a blockchain to make sure nobody can change that ever once after the collection, so you can have a favorable analysis afterwards and so on. So technically, there are a lot of smart ideas. To me, it always comes down to, will that culturally happen in academia?
And maybe related to the question, I have a question myself, which is, I mean, trying to look at very future perspectives. Yesterday, I was in an event that was about the digitalization of businesses, and they mentioned that businesses are facing a situation that was seen in the movie The Life of Brian, in which there was a queue of people in front of a door, and the words on the top of the door were crucifixion. And so apparently businesses are facing the same issue. That is, for example, the press has already gone to crucifixion. The next business apparently is a bank. Maybe science is something that will be affected as well by digitalization. How do you imagine, I mean, do you think that there will be things happening in science that will look like, for example, you know, the house buying business that is now done through the internet, or the travel agency business that is now done through directly by people in first person through the internet? Do you, I mean, how do you, if you had to imagine in a sort of science fiction fashion how science will look like in the far future, do you have any idea of what will happen due to digitalization?
The uberisation of science.
Yeah, uberisation. I was referring precisely to that.
Well, I think
is this something that you think will happen?
All the funders are hoping that it will happen. They surely are throwing incentives in that direction. But I guess to go back to the real world, there would be a lot of individual incentives and benefits at individual level. If that were to move in that direction, and if people adopt that attitude, and Sasha mentioned the impact incentives when you do small, simple steps in that direction, and you use the internet tools. I mean, when we look at what funders are trying to fund and how difficult those goals are to address, they're very ambitious. So there's a suggestion that there definitely is a top-down appetite to go in that direction. How much we can actually achieve remains to be seen. But even if we achieve half of the ambition, that's still a lot.
Okay. By the way, there is a comment by one of the person in the public called Horacio, and he says the discussion is focusing too much on rewards instead of the possibilities that open science brings to advance in our research. How becoming open would advance research. I think we have commented a little bit on this, but maybe we could insist. I mean, why? I mean, how could open science really improve, let's say, the way in which we do research now? I think we have said a lot on this, but maybe Horacio needs more examples of really how could maybe his personal research could be affected. Any other remark, comment on the advantages of switching to open somehow? No? Maybe I mean, yeah?
I think we're being quiet because it's a loaded question and it's a little bit bigger than the 15 minutes we have left.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe one summarizing things that you have already said. I mean, apparently, openness would save a lot of time into finding data, repeating experiments that have already been done. Also, sharing preliminary results may help a lot. Joining efforts with many different people may help a lot. Having a wider audience, more awareness of one's research, reaching out to academia, negative results, etc. I think, I mean, I'm just summarizing notes that have been taken. I hope
Sasha mentioned it well. If you're doing research to be read, then that is the personal.
Okay.
May I perhaps say something as well?
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say, of course, there's an added value in terms of as a scientist to open your data. Indeed, as Eva said, I think it's a broad topic. We may not have the time to go into details of this right now, but also as a citizen. I mean, you know, we, as you were saying, Michele, the banking system went down, etc. Will science be the next one? I think what's important to keep in mind for scientists is that they have to be open to the world. I mean, if you want, you know, to get funding from citizens, from taxpayers' money, to basically fund your research, you know, the general society has to really grasp that there's an added value of us funding research. So this means, and for example, whether it's public engagement activities of researchers or engaging in citizen science, these are, for example, ways to better link and even integrate citizens in the science you're doing. There are some key, just to give you an example with the citizen science, you know, now, for example, if you're a researcher in whatever, you're working on special animal species that is disappearing, you know, now you have applications where basically citizens can help you track these animals in their natural habitats. They take a picture with their cell phone, and then, okay, you have to analyze the data, but they're helping you collect the data. There are other examples where actually you have even citizens participating in the research design. Sometimes, you know, just having a conference where you talk about your project, about your research projects with somebody that doesn't know anything about it. Sometimes people ask very genuine questions that are of very high scientific relevance, and this is also underestimated by a lot of researchers. I could give you a few examples, but it's really, you know, it's like when you talk to a child somehow, you know, if you explain to him or to her what you're doing, sometimes they come with very deep questions that you didn't necessarily think about. They have a new approach, and they give a different angle and perspective on your work that can actually bring real added value to your research work from a scientific point of view. But just being able, for example, last week there was the European Researchers Night, and being able to liaise with society is key if we want to build this trust relationship that we need for people to continue to invest and support politicians in investing in science. So, you know, basically what my point is, scientists are, I believe, are quite open by nature, but it's important to open not only to your peers, but only to society in a broader sense. I think now we live with social media, everybody's interacting, everybody wants transparency, etc. So this is a new dimension that researchers have to integrate because there's added value to it, and because it's a necessity as well. So I think this we have to work on.
Yeah,
maybe
just by the way.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah, just a very hands-on example of what happens when you do open science is the other week I received a letter from a company that just German school books. They included one of my studies that is under a Creative Commons license in one of their school books or parts of it. So now school children in Germany will learn something that I worked on. And I mean, simply those little things that you open up your research so it's available for those people who actually care, it makes the entire system better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you have answered extensively to a question by a person called .com, which I suspect is a nickname, and he or she said an important part of open science is also making science understandable for general public. Are there any actions planned to support popularization of science by scientists? I think you already answered. So let's go to a question, because we have many questions in the queue. So I will try to do it as efficiently as possible. A question by Maya, who says, what can universities do? Change evaluation system, maybe?
Well, I can't in this one because I'm also belonging to a university and a researcher, and also I'm in the I used to be deputy vice president of these kind of things. I'm in charge. The universities, we have to do our own research policy. I mean, you can you cannot reinvent the wheel. You have to embrace the international policies and make the institutional open science policy part of the world. And also sometimes, since we are universities and we have our own mechanisms, we can just explain better to our community how this affects the impact of the whole university. The more open is the research, the more open is the university, the more impact, the real impact, not impact factor, the real impact you will have. So it's the same thing that happened with the open education. If you make a MOOC, you can have 7,000 students. If you have a closed door in your class, you have 70 students, not 7,000. So that's a difference.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And now there is a question, let's say, on a subject that I am surprised didn't came up earlier in the webinar. A question by Melissa. She says, how is a grassroots movement of open science from researchers able to fully function in the constricted system of journals and publishers that operate as businesses who have economic disincentives to be open? So, I mean, obviously, the big issues of open publication. Anybody wanting to comment? I mean, how do we make compatible publication system which is for profit and open science?
We only have 6 minutes. I want you to know.
Yeah, so you really have to go to the point, because moreover, we have 2 questions more in queue. I mean,
maybe I can just try to say something. I think also because of course publishers are for profit. That's the least we can say. But I think publishers are also quite aware that things are changing and they're adapting. So they're inventing new business models that will enable them to somehow to also continue to make profit, following perhaps different approaches. But I don't think more and more journals, including the most renowned one, let's say, have a policy on open access. There are various, the 50 shades of open access, as I once read it. Okay, but policies for publishers. But still, I wouldn't be too worried. I think they're adapting and they're finding new business models. I don't think you need to worry too much.
Okay, any more remarks on publishers?
Just very quickly, I several times remarked on the fact that I think that it's not a decision that the individual scientists can make not to have journals anymore, but I think funding agencies actually have way more power in this current situation than they might think they have. And the idea of maybe moving towards a publication platform that is funded by science funders and does not come out of the publishers we have tried to convince of open access for the last 15 years might be a way to go, or at least to discuss. So I'm not convinced that the publishers will actually behave in the best interest of science as a whole. I've seen too many bad examples. So I think that In that case, we have an oligopolistic system, and if you talk to any economist and you have such a system, they'll always tell you the more competition you have, the probably more will happen here. So I think we need find new ways for research outlets that actually count, and maybe have science funders be part of that in a way. And we have several initiatives now in the US, from the Wellcome Trust, for instance, where they try to go exactly into that direction. And I think more of that is needed to put more pressure on the few big publishers that otherwise will dictate the way that they would like to have it.
And if you're looking for more pragmatic grassroots step-by-step how-tos, there is actually a grassroots movement, Open Science MOOC, which is, if you like, the philosophy of for us, by us, and it's just by young, early career researchers trying to compile 10 basic lessons on, if you knew nothing about open science, what do you need to do to get there in this environment?
Okay. Okay, so two last questions, and then we move to the conclusion, because the time, unfortunately, is running out. So they are both related basically to the relation with business, okay? So the first question by Edward is how to balance open science in a context where universities are encouraged, officially or unofficially, to join private partners, industry. And the second question by Asuncion is perhaps some discussion on copyright, copyleft, commons issues, as these relate to open access, might be of interest, and the danger that open science might bring to patents and similar issues. I think the two are related. So, I mean, how to, let's say, balance open science and public-private collaboration, patents, copyright, etc. I think it's a broad question as well, but yeah, let's use these last minutes to tackle it.
But I think it's a very interesting. It is a very interesting one, because it's something that we might consider in the whole European policy of open science, but also open innovation. Jesse was starting his 5-minute talk with this, and also you have to consider open innovation as a new mechanism to improve, you know, the industry. But also sometimes if you mix in a project in a, for example, think about the funders. If you mix in a project, a private company and a public university or something like that, you have to agree upon in without the rights of the results. If you are getting funded, publicly funded research, if you are using public money, you have to open the results. If not, you can just do your own research in your company. That's my perception. If you use my taxpayer money, you have to give the society the results back. That's no discussion about this for me. But it's a very difficult point.
May I add something, perhaps, to what Eva was saying? Well, you know, under Horizon 2020, of course, open access publications is something mandatory, and little by little, we're more and more encouraging also open research data and fair data management and so on. But there's still the possibility to opt out, of course, if for intellectual property reasons, you would need to keep that data closed or partially closed, etc. However, I think that we shouldn't be thinking, okay, open access is just for, you know, public or publicly funded research. I think industry also may have that are doing research also have some things to share. I think if, for example, when you know you're working on a product, to take just an example, no matter the industry or say pharmaceutical or whatever, you will be generating some data that actually you won't be using because they won't be leading to your product. It won't be marketable. And okay, some companies may tend to still patent that in case, you know, they could use that for later, but not all of them do. And actually, some of these data could be shared with academics and be a good basis for collaboration with academia. I know that, you know, for industry, if the data that's generated is not going to be used to build the product, they're actually quite keen on making by collaborating with academia to gain credibility from a scientific point of view and get recognition from the scientific community. So not all data industry or private organizations are meant to be closed. I think actually industry is quite eager to put at value this data they're generating to establish collaborations and to gain more visibility on the scientific scene. So you could also imagine, for example, sometimes industrials work on a certain product, but for example, they also have some side projects on how to improve their processes. And for example, this kind of with the public.
Julie, I'm afraid I have to. Sorry, Julie, I'm afraid I have to interrupt you because the quality of the connection is not good and we cannot hear you. And moreover, we are over time. So one last remark, really 20 seconds each by Ivo and Sasha if you want. Otherwise, I will go to the conclusion.
Maybe, yeah, 20 seconds. Just to echo what Julie was saying, for those of you interested, the topic is very emerging, the complementarity between open science and open innovation. And there's an interesting experiment to keep an eye on in Denmark. The University of Aarhus and a collection of companies have gotten together and said, we will co-fund research and we don't want to protect any of it. And the private sector was more forthcoming than this.
Sasha, any final remarks?
Very, very quickly. I think it's oversimplified to say companies want patents, scientists want open. I think there's a lot of open source software, for instance, that came out of companies that then thought about different business models on how to monetize something that's publicly available. So I don't think it's that. I think we can find ways, and if they want to collaborate with researchers, then they'll find ways to build business models around open results.
Okay, so thanks a lot to the speakers. Many people are sending messages thanking for the webinar finding it very interesting, and there's even somebody asking for a follow-up webinar. We will think about it. Anyway, thanks again.
Michele, hold on a second, if I may. Hold on, I want to show something to you.
Oh, great. Surprise.
It was on my wall, but I think it will be more useful to you guys. The Open Access International Week. Guys,
okay.
Open in order to, at the end of the month, go for it. Get started.
Okay, great. Great, thanks a lot, Julie, and stay tuned with the Marie Curie Alumni Association and EuroScientist channels for the next webinars, and the recording of the webinar. This webinar will be ready in a matter of minutes, I think, or hours, to be shared and rechecked, etc. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.